We are live in conversation with Dale Vaz, the head of engineering and data sciences for Swiggy. Dale, we've known each other for quite some time now, and I do remember or recall the first time that we met. The Amazon director who walks into Starbucks, and I couldn't really tell that you were actually the person that I was going to meet. Yeah, you're an avid trader. Most people who are watching the show probably don't know that. And most importantly, what I like about Dale, and one of our favorites on the show, is his humility and his ability to actually speak to anybody in the room with ease. So, welcoming you on the show, Dale. Happy to have you here.
Thanks, Roopa. Super excited to be here at Purple Quarter office. You guys have a great office, and as you said, it's been almost a 2-year plus journey with Purple Quarter, and along the way, I've come to appreciate the level of detail and rigor you guys put in placing candidates. So I'm super excited to be back here to talk to you and to share my learnings through this journey.
Sure. I think I've been on the other side of the table always talking about how Swiggy is great. But today, I would definitely want to ask you, what is the actual challenges that you faced once you moved from a $1 trillion company like Amazon and you moved into when Swiggy was still a $1 million company? And I do really remember that, yes, Swiggy was part of touching all our worlds, maybe in most cities, if I may say so. Yeah, but I'm sure from a tech angle, you'd be able to tell us what really was there for you when you went in there.
Yeah, so when I joined Swiggy, Swiggy was still relatively a smaller company. We were in 17 cities at that time. So while we had established a footprint in most of the big cities, we really weren't there in every single city. In the last year and a half, we've moved from 17 cities to now more than 575 cities and towns across India. So we've scaled the business rapidly, and part of the challenge of that phase of Swiggy was really how do we go from being a company that has achieved product market fit, which is you could say the 0 to 1, to now go from the 1 to 10, right? So the 10x challenge is really where the interesting bits are about what we're doing here at Swiggy. It's about moving from a company that works for maybe tens of millions of customers to now hundreds of millions of customers. A company that works for a certain kind of profile of customers who are looking for ease of use to maybe all kinds of profiles of customers, including people like homemakers and elder citizens and so on. And so the interesting dimensions that where we're taking Swiggy, which is where I was really excited about, is how do you take Swiggy from being a household name that's known within maybe 17 cities and within a subset of the population to being a household name that actually transforms the way India lives and eats. And that journey is really the journey we have ahead, and that's where I started. Now, given that context, it's obviously not been a super simple transition coming from a company like Amazon. I think the first thing that you realize is that a lot of the assumptions you make around things that are solved in a company like Amazon don't hold true when you come to a newer company, especially a smaller company. Some of the systems that we had, as well as some of the ways of working that we had, which was so well part of the Amazon culture, in some cases they have to be reinvented for a company like Swiggy. You obviously don't want to take what's in Amazon and bring it to Swiggy, but you also want to be able to understand what's unique to the Swiggy culture and how can you bring something about that will both help us grow, but also build on the amazing culture that we already have at Swiggy. So part of my journey in the last few months and maybe the last year and a half has been fundamentally around the building the foundation for that next 10x journey. The foundation on the organization itself. We've hired a bunch of people, some really smart engineers, leaders from different parts of India, as well as people coming back to India have joined the Swiggy team, and we've really spent that time in building this foundation of a strong organization. We've also focused on building strong technology where we've looked at saying how do we invest in some of the key systems so we can scale effortlessly from 17 cities to say 500 plus cities. And that's been a second investment in our foundations. And the third investment in foundations has been on AI, where we've looked at saying how do we replace some of these business systems, these human intuition-based systems with more intelligent systems, essentially systems that run on AI. And over the last year and a half, we've again built a bunch of these models. So that's been the journey so far, the foundation. As I look ahead, it's really around optimization of this foundation.
Sure. Can we deep dive a little? Because I do recall that you moved from the US to India. First, that was a shocker,
Yeah.
a bit of a shocker for you. Looked at Amazon in the US versus Amazon India, and then you moved into a startup. So, for all people who are looking at moving from the US to a startup in India, or even within India, from a larger company to a startup, what are the few things that you went through? We'd like to share that with people watching the show.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, there were almost two transitions, as you said. The first transition was moving from the US to India, and after 14 years in the US, that was initially itself a big transition, but was made simpler because we moved with Amazon. And then a couple of years after that, we moved from Amazon India to Swiggy. So the second transition was moving from a US-based company in India to an Indian startup company, and that was the second bit. I think in the first one, I would say the biggest transformation was in just trying to understand the ways of working. And fundamentally, I found that the ways of working are quite significantly different between, say, companies which are based in the West versus companies in India. And part of it is the way we, as you know, maybe culturally, we operate differently in the way we communicate, the way we make decisions, the way we look at choices that we have to choose. There are different reasons that have shaped the ways of working. One example is capital. If you think about the Indian ecosystem, unlike the US, the startup world, there in the Bay Area, capital is very easily accessible. So there you have essentially startup founders go and pick the best form of capital that they can from angel investors and so on. In India, capital is not as easily accessible. So people have to worry about how can they make short-term incremental movements even as they want to dream big. So that translates then into the ways of working where you may find in the US people may be comfortable making a 2-3 year grand plan and following on that mission. While in India, maybe companies are forced to look at annual plans and even quarterly plans and targets so that they can continue to show value to their investors. And I think those are examples of what, for me, were the first big realization that I need to essentially modify my ways of working to match the ecosystem here. I can't come in and apply a US-based way of thinking to the Indian ecosystem because it's a different set of constraints, a different set of challenges here. So when you start with that kind of thinking, everything fell in place because a part of it was really how can I learn how people here have been successful given the Indian ecosystem and the constraints they have. So the first few months was essentially me unlearning some of these ways of working that I had from the US and learning new ones which are from the Indian ecosystem. Trying to think about how we think of innovation and how we think of speed of execution and how we think of essentially leveraging through networks versus building everything ourselves. A lot of these new patterns were what I learned. And so, when I think back, as long as you feel comfortable being able to unlearn some of the ways of working that you've built up, I think people can and will be able to make a transition from the US to the Indian ecosystem quite well.
Thank you so much for that input. Well, if I have to look at Swiggy, in fact, when you joined them, I was super excited for the fact that there's going to be a lot of innovation. Food tech was more, if I may say so, it was more unorganized. If you look at what happens outside, let's just look at India, for example. Everybody eats different kinds of flavors and different kinds of food from one family to the other. Yeah, and if you look at what Swiggy was doing when you joined them, it was just food tech, more delivery in terms of getting a parcel from one place to the other. So when you got in, I saw the whole dimension change. You moved it from food tech to a delivery convenience app. We get to use stores, Swiggy stores, Swiggy Go. I'm a Swiggy Go user and Swiggy stores user as well. Well, when I look at it from the outside, like a 360-degree view that I get, it's becoming more like Amazon, isn't it? Like where you have your food tech, you have stores now which is competing with Big Basket, you have Swiggy Go which is like more like Dunzo. The whole piece that what are the other things that you guys are going to get into from a delivery convenience app, and how has this in fact helped consumers like us? From a technology, how has it really helped, and for a consumer, how has it helped?
Yeah, so it's interesting because if you look at Harsha's vision, the co-founder, and this was true even when I was talking to him maybe 2.5 years ago. It's always been about delivering convenience to customers.
Sure.
So while people think of Swiggy as a food delivery company, I think internally the founders had always thought of Swiggy as much larger than just food, focusing on everything that's related to convenience. And convenience could be anything that you need in your daily life, right? So you need grocery, you need milk, if you need medicines, if you even need a newspaper, or if you need, say, diapers for a young kid. Any such need that we have in daily life should be something that Swiggy can fulfill. And so that was the vision for of which Swiggy had, and it's been consistent there. I think where we've gone in is in terms of the implementation of that vision, we've picked on food as the first category. And that's useful because food is an extremely highly habit forming category and also highly transactional category. So you get to very quickly learn from customers if they like your service or not. But then now that we've proved that food can be scaled, we've also then started to advance that vision by adding on these other categories of grocery, medicines, and so on. So in some sense, Swiggy Store, Swiggy Go is actually nothing but an extension of the original vision of Swiggy, which is always to provide unparalleled convenience to consumers. And so we'll continue to work on that vision. And to your point about what else is next, it's obviously something that we keep looking at. What are the unserved, unmet needs consumers have? Which are the categories, which are the services that today consumers don't have access to, that Swiggy can come and provide unparalleled convenience. So as we look at the ecosystem, we keep identifying new domains and new areas that we will want to invest in. One example is we're working with restaurants to look at how can they leverage their space to provide new selection to customers. And the new selection is essentially if you go to a place, let's say you go to a place like Malleshwaram, and you look at saying what are the customers in Malleshwaram looking for. There's obviously customers looking for South Indian food, but then there may also be customers looking for great North Indian food. And maybe when you look at the data, you identify that there aren't enough North Indian restaurants options available in Malleshwaram, right? So we have this program called Brand Works, where we actually work with restaurants to say we use a lot of data analytics to analyze the the shopping pattern of customers on the site, on the app. We look at what restaurants they're searching for. We look at what items they're trying to buy. We also look at what kind of affinity a customer has. So we have built ML-based models where we can identify the kind of affinity the customer has. So basis the orders that you've purchased, we can identify, for example, that you may like salads and you may like maybe soups, while somebody else in your office may like biryani and another person may like pizza. Sure. So your preference is very different from the person sitting next to you. Right, and so what we then do is we look at, say, in an area like Malleshwaram, how many such customers actually like North Indian food, and have shown that affinity to order on North Indian food. And if we identify that there is a significant enough addressable market and an unmet need in terms of restaurants providing North Indian food, then we work with a restaurant partner to say, can we actually help you build a new brand which is focused on this gap that we identify? And they launch this from their kitchen. So with BrandWorks, we've actually launched 100 new brands which are built by these restaurants, around 95 different restaurant partners who are essentially with our analytics and insight being able to identify a new set of selection, new set of menu items that customers will want. And then the intent there is again to bring new choice, new convenience to customers, right? Sure. In a way in which it's very cost effective for restaurants. So combining the power of their data analytics and AI along with on the ground knowledge of what consumers want is really what brings that secret sauce together. And then we can provide that to restaurants who can then look at saying, if I have invested in a certain space, how can I get more leverage from it by launching more selection? So that is really how example of how we are bringing together data and looking at consumer insights to be able to provide some wow experiences. Sure. There are lots more. It continues to be something that we constantly work on.
So are you saying this personalization would work even if I have to move, if I move to another city?
Yeah.
Does it work as well?
Yeah, so it actually is it kind of follows you through the platform. Okay. So we've identified your preferences. We also identify preferences by city, by time. So the interesting bit about food is today I may feel like having salad in the afternoon, but maybe at night I may feel like having something more extensive. Similarly, in the weekdays, when you're in office, you may want to have something simple. But on the weekends, you may find yourself having maybe a little more extravagant food options, right? So even as individuals, our need changes based on the time of the day and the place we are at. So we've also identified that insight that it's not just that I always like biryani, it's also I like biryani at a certain time and a certain place. And that's what you then combine. So you combine what we call food intelligence, which is essentially understanding of the food, with customer intelligence, which is understanding of the customer, and then you combine that with time and day information. So this customer, this food, in this time of the day, they probably have a better need for it. All of that comes to work and actually delivers this experience on the app. So if you go to the Swiggy app and you open up the homepage, you'll see recommendations which will actually change basis the place you are at and the time of day that you are at.
Sure, sure. All this sounds very interesting. So that brings us back to the most important problem that an offline and online model really faces, right? Because whatever said and done, you have FOS, your feet on street, who are delivering these packages. You're going to be using the same set of audience, I'm sure, for all three verticals, whether be it a Go, Swiggy stores, or the delivery. So, how is the time management happening? Is technology helping there, or is it still a lot of manual intervention that's there? Or has, like you rightly said, AI is something that we are all looking at. So, has that really helped?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the places we've invested a lot of technology and AI over the last maybe 2+ years. So what happens is when you have say orders come in, you've got a fixed number of orders, but you also have a finite number of drivers. And so the real challenge is how do you define which driver should be fulfilling which order? And to your point, there could be one order coming for food, there could be another order coming for Swiggy stores, another one for Go. So the problem space is basically what we call an assignment problem, where you have to assign a certain amount of work to a certain number of resources. And you have to do that in a way in which you optimize on constraints. Constraints could be you have to deliver within the time the customer was promised. It's obviously the first constraint. You also have to find the cost-effective way of delivering. Then you also have to figure out whether there are rules in which you cannot assign. For example, I don't want to assign somebody sitting in Kormangla an order that's in Malleshwaram because the driver will have to travel across the city. So you're also figuring out different constraints that go into an assignment. And when you have that, you get reduced to this basic problem, which is essentially a mathematical problem that we have, which is essentially looking at saying if I have a set of resources and I have a set of orders, what is that unique combination that will optimize for that set? So we have built this technology, which is a combination of AI-based models and an optimization research, or OR-based math functions, which every 2 minutes in any given zone in, say, Kormangla, every 2 minutes we run this algorithm that looks at all the orders that have come in, looks at all the drivers that are available, and then starts to predict which driver will become free in the next few minutes and which driver is actually available to take up a new order. And based on those predictions, it will then match the set of items to the drivers. It will also include things like the driver's skill. Is this driver capable of being able to fulfill a grocery order? Is this driver capable of doing a package, or Go package pickup, and so on? So all that's happening, that's the secret sauce. Even as we speak right now, that algorithm is running and making sure that across India, millions of orders are being fulfilled and customers are getting their dishes and products like clockwork.
Sure. I find your role extremely intriguing only for the fact that, engineering is where you have to be in the system, and data sciences, you have to be on the system. So you seem to be donning both the hats, right? Being part of the system and looking at transactions and being on top of it to say, what should we be doing for the next 5 years? How is it working out for you? I'm really, interested to know, how do you do both these roles at the same time?
Yeah, it's a serious case of split personality that I carry when I go into office. I think you're right. With engineering, it's largely about the here and now and how do you scale for the next 3 months, maybe the next big peak that's coming up, like a New Year peak or an IPL. And then with data science, it's really about thinking beyond what's capable now and how can I leverage what I have to build something maybe which doesn't even exist. And so the part of this is also what we've done is we've organized ourselves into almost having two separate focus areas. There's one part of our organization that focuses on the business problems that are relevant to the current plan, which is the current annual plan. And that's the team that's really looking at the here and now problems. And there we have engineers, and there we also have data scientists helping out in optimization of logistics and optimization of discovery and so on. And then the second part of the organization is what we call the applied research, which is slightly long-term in their view. And this is the team that in some senses, the horsepower behind thinking around how do we solve some of the more advanced technologies like voice, vision, and text. So how do we get to the next set of evolutions where we're able to understand customer interactions through the voice that they use, through the images of the food that they have, or maybe even through the chat and the text that they have. And so, kind of creating these two separate teams allows me to maybe spend some time with one team worrying about the here and now, and then switching gears immediately and spending time with another team thinking about the next set of evolution of technology and investments. And part of this is just kind of getting good at being able to apply different hats at different times, switching in and out of what's necessary for the short term versus what's necessary for the long term.
Sure, sure. I think kudos to you on what you've done, even with the chatbot that happens at Swiggy, because I use a lot of Swiggy. I see that you don't need to really talk to a live person. The chatbot really clearly says what you need to look at. Do you see us getting to a voice text as well, where I can just order using my voice on Swiggy? Do you see that happening?
It's something I think we believe long-term customers will move away from typing
Right.
to interacting with devices in a more natural way. Just like we are speaking right now,
Sure.
at some point in time, you may have a virtual bot running the podcast
Right.
and a virtual me answering the podcast.
Sure.
As long as we program the bots with our questions and answers, we don't need to physically be present.
Teleporting, you're
We
saying.
don't need to physically be present here.
Sure.
So that's an option, but it's true. I think at least I personally feel that technology will at some point fade away into the background, and you will interact with technology without really understanding its technology. Today, you remove your phone out of your pocket and you physically have to type on it with your fingers, which is very unnatural. But if you see a kid use technology, especially when I look at my kids, my daughter, when she was 4 years old, she was able to speak to Alexa and just command it to do stuff. And for her, that was very natural versus having to go find the character on the screen and then type on it. So when I have her type on a screen, even though she knows how to read and write, she just finds it very hard to go find letters and match them. But if I give her a complex instruction and I have her do it with Alexa, she's able to do it. Right. So I think yes, the future is going to be about interactions like voice, maybe touch, may even be your physical presence. Like you walk in the room and the system detects you, and the lights dim and the temperature sets to a certain value. So in that world, you can imagine food delivery and convenience also being redefined. For example, you could be in a world where morning when you wake up, Alexa will just ask you, do you want me to reorder your food, your favorite breakfast from Swiggy? And you may say yes. And then you go in for a bath, and by the time you come out from your shower, your food is ready and it's delivered via Swiggy. And so we do want to get into this place where we can understand voice. The challenge with India is the different levels of dialect, language differences. So from that perspective, it's a very hard, unsolved problem. We have begun a very early stage pilot within Swiggy trying to figure out, can we understand voice calls that customers are making into our customer service today? And as we build that capability over time, maybe we get to more sophistication like voice ordering.
Got it. Got it. So if you look at it, roti, kapda, or makan, you guys have taken the major piece of the cake. Roti is what Swiggy really started with, and it's, if you look at how the market segmentation is currently, only two names come to our mind. With the third one, making news today as we speak, which is Amazon's entering the food delivery piece as well. So how does this impact indoors inside Swiggy from a tech perspective? Because if you look at it, everyone's going to be used to using the app in a similar fashion. So how different is Swiggy going to be in the future for us to use to order any of this, like a delivery convenience app?
Yeah. So first, I think we are like, super excited about new competition coming into the market because I think as a consumer, it will be good for all consumers, especially the competition will keep all of us on our toes and keep focusing on innovating for consumers. So in the long run, I think it's a good thing that we have more high quality competition in the market. What that does for a company like Swiggy is, as to your point, you don't want to be a Me Too product. You don't want to just be just another place where people can find the same experience that they can find anywhere else. In which case, over time, it's hard to differentiate. It's also hard to retain customers. So this is definitely one of those opportunities for us to start thinking, beyond what we currently do. And while I cannot talk about a lot of stuff that we are doing, I think it's fair to say that we just started to scratch the surface of what can be done. Because if you look at the consumers, what we call the need journey, from the time maybe you are in your teenagers, when you start to actually influence online ordering, till the time you end up having a family and maybe even retire, there are different needs that customers go through. Needs in terms of the kind of food they want, the preferences they want, the focus on affordability, focus on premium, and so on. And so what I think we need to figure out is how do we get to a place where rather than provide a one size fits all product to every single customer, can we provide a highly customized, highly personalized Swiggy experience that answers to your need? If you are in the need for a quick meal, how can I deliver that? Versus if you are in the need for something where you're looking to order for your team and you want to be able to make sure the food is delivered on time and it's completely high quality with no missing items. So there could be differences in customers' need basis even a certain occasion. And so we need to really get closer to our customers. We really need to understand what the customer's needs are in that moment and then figure out how do we build an extremely flexible product that can react to these needs and provide customers the experience they deserve in that moment. And that experience could be different from the experience of somebody sitting right next to you. So that's kind of the end state. Now, when you think about that, it's really means rethinking this entire wiring, where we have to build intelligence into the entire product. Intelligence about our consumers, intelligence about our drivers, intelligence about the restaurants, intelligence about the locations, the maps, the roads that we use, and all of that. And then use that to be in real time, be able to customize the offering to individual customers. So that's the journey. And as I said, we've just started it. So it's very early days. Hopefully in the next few months and maybe years, we'll see some exciting things come out and we'll keep wowing the customer.
Wow. We're already in wow of Swiggy. Well, Dale, I wanted to ask you a personal question in terms of you being a technologist and you've evolved over these years. So how do you actually go ahead and upgrade yourself, from a tech perspective? Because the landscape differs from every region. How do you manage to do that?
It's a great question. I interestingly had a similar question just a couple of days back in a different place I was at, and I think a couple of things. First is maybe I've just been lucky enough to have grown up with this, would say, love for learning. And it's not learning from a more traditional sense where it focused on, say, grades, but learning from a curiosity sense. Saying I've always been curious about trying to read about stuff that is very random. And that also is how I entered into trading, where it came in from investment focus, but eventually ended up looking at saying, is there any fun in derivative trading, and went into that direction. So some of it is just my natural sense in being curious, which has allowed me to constantly read up on things that are emerging. So whenever I hear of something, if I don't know about it, I try to make some time to read about it and then follow the threads and just keep reading until I feel I know enough about a topic. So the first thing is really about saying, like, can we be curious? Can we always be learning where we just keep reading about things we don't know? But the second issue, the challenge of that approach is that there are too many things you can read. And then you have the other problem where people just try to read about every single topic, and it's just not possible to become a master of all. So what I have tried to do is actually try to balance out my learning needs with what my actually would say best possible outcomes are. For example, at this level, at this point, I could still go and learn about what it is to code in a new language. And so I try practice and improve my coding skills. Right?
Which
That's
language?
say Scala or Go or some of the new languages. But the question is that going to be as productive and as value added to me versus maybe learning about new architectures and new scale related challenges, which is probably where I'll spend more of my time. So that's an example where I then pick the topic that I want to learn basis what gives me most value. So I think learning by itself, unconstrained learning, is also bad because you'll end up trying to gather too many books in your house or in your Kindle bookshelf. But learning with a filter of what's relevant to your current needs is probably one way to focus and get some relevant skills.
Sure. So, one last question before we wrap up the podcast is in terms of culture. So, Amazon culture is very well known to a lot of people, and Swiggy, of course, we knew of how the culture was. So, what is it that you did right now, and what does your team say when we look at Swiggy culture on today's date? This is specifically for people who want to come and join your team, Dale.
So, the right answer will come from my team, not from me. I'm hoping they will be the ones who can talk about the culture I've set. But I'd like to believe that we've tried really hard to combine the culture of what was working very well for Swiggy with some of the outside in new ideas that have come from people who've joined from other companies.
Sure.
And if you look at the Swiggy core culture, it's largely been about being an entrepreneur, being extremely ambitious and fearless in trying to take on hard challenges, and then showing this mission spirit where, irrespective of what the outcome is, people are really in it because they believe in the value that they are providing and the impact that they are making. So that was, and that continues to remain at the core the Swiggy spirit, right, which is really what's powering most of the company. Now, on top of that, we've taken some of the outside-in aspects that maybe we've seen from companies that have done very well. One example is just the focus on the details, what we used to call in Amazon dive deep. And dive deep is an example of a leadership principle that requires every leader to be able to go to the bottom detail and make sure that they are able to be hands-on when the time comes. Now, what that does is it ensures that while we are trying to move fast and be ambitious and be innovative, we're also taking care of the details so that we are not leaving behind a string of unfulfilled promises, maybe broken systems or incomplete products. So the combination of dive deep with this think big entrepreneurial spirit has been something that we've tried to bring as an example. There's also been maybe a little bit of focus on trying to balance between speed of execution and slow thinking. It's another thing that we've seen that when in a company that's really fighting for its existential position, there's always a bias towards moving fast and trying to deliver something right away so you can keep moving forward. At the same time, as you take on bigger and more complex problems, you can't solve everything by moving fast. You've got to sometimes spend time in slow thinking to actually understand the problem and then go deep and then solve it. So the interesting bits in culture about Swiggy last year has also been about trying to infuse an amount of slow thinking into the organization while continuing to move fast.
Sure.
And the challenge is finding what points do you say let's move fast versus no, let's actually slow down and get this right because this is going to be important long term. So that's been part of the the culture journey that we've had.
And how is Dale as a boss?
Again, a question best answered by my team. I'm sure they have a point of view on that. I'd like to believe that I operate largely from a trust but verify standpoint. I like to trust my team. I focus a lot on hiring people I really like. So when I hire people I really like, half the battle is done because I trust them coming into the organization because I've hired them myself. And then when you hire them, I trust them with goals and opportunities that they need to focus on delivering it. So if they need the people, they need the mandate, the charter, I empower them. And then I let them run with it. But at the same time, I've learned through Swiggy, through Amazon actually, that you have to be able to verify. Just blind trust is also hard. So the trust but verify thing is where I then have my own audits and I have my own checkpoints to be able to understand if things are going on track. So typically, as a manager, you'll find me more goal oriented. I focus more on outcomes versus trying to micromanage to a task or a date or a time. I also look at saying, are we building longer term value versus short term benefit? So if there is, for example, if we spend 1 month more on a project and are able to build a much bigger system that scales more well, I would rather do that than to rush something out and get it done and then go back and rework it. So those kind of maybe mental models have served me in how I approach my management style.
Well, just because we know each other, to add to that, I think two specific traits that Dale definitely has. One is in terms of listening. I think you're a great listener when it comes to your people coming up to you and talking to you. I've heard that from your folks who reported into you at Amazon and now at Swiggy as well. And the second most important trait, which really you carry along with you, Dale, is one when you were with Amazon, you had this extremely passionate, rigor for Amazon, what they were building. And then as soon as you moved to Swiggy, I heard you only talk about Swiggy, and you had your thinking hat on what you want to do for Swiggy, right? So definitely there's a lot of technology mindset within, and there's a business acumen, I think, because of the trading that you've gotten yourself into. So for most listeners and viewers, I think great team to join in terms of Swiggy, and great, lovely boss to have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you
you,
so
Roopa.
much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.